The paper slipped from the pocket of his jacket like a bird with a broken wing. I had been gathering the laundry that morning, folding shirts and pressing the fabric against my chest the way I had done for decades. My husband always left his suit draped across the chair in the bedroom corner. When I lifted it, something stiff and foreign fluttered to the floor. At first, I thought it was an old receipt. Nothing unusual, he often forgot small scraps of paper. But as I bent to pick it up, my breath stopped. It was a hotel bill, a crisp official sheet, the ink still dark, the edges still sharp. The date was recent, only a few days ago. My eyes traveled down the page, each line shaking the steadiness of my hands, and then I saw them two names, printed side by side, his name and hers, my daughter-in-law. For a long while, I couldn't breathe. The walls around me seemed to press inward, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan turning into a roar in my ears. I reread the paper again and again, hoping the letters would blur into something else, some mistake of the machine. But they did not change. It was his name and her name, together, a single room. I sank onto the bed, the fabric of his suit still clutched in one hand, the damning bill in the other. 1,000 memories surged up at once the day I first met her, shy and polite, with eyes lowered and hands folded. The pride in my son's face when he introduced her as his future wife. The wedding day, when I believed we had welcomed another daughter into our home, a bond that would strengthen the family. I had trusted her. I had trusted him. The questions began to gnaw at me before I could stop them. Why were they there, in that place, together? Was it business? Was it an error? Or was it the very betrayal a wife and mother fears but never prepares for? I pressed the paper to my chest, as if the pressure could squeeze the truth from it. But it only lay there, silent, unyielding. The house was still, but inside me a storm gathered. My son was at work. My husband had stepped out early, saying he had errands to run. My daughter-in-law had left after breakfast, humming softly as she slipped on her shoes. None of them knew that I held this slip of paper in my hands. None of them imagined that my heart had cracked open in the space of a single morning. I wanted to march into the street and shout the truth, or what I believed was the truth. I wanted to demand explanations, to thrust the bill into their faces and watch them stammer. But another part of me, the quieter, older part, whispered caution. What if I was wrong? What if this paper was nothing more than a coincidence? What if I tore apart the family I had spent a lifetime protecting, all because of a single sheet of paper? So I folded it carefully, almost reverently, and slipped it into the drawer beside my bed. My hands trembled as if I had hidden a weapon. And perhaps I had, for this bill was not just a receipt, it was a blade that could cut everything we had built. The rest of the day moved on as if nothing had happened. I cooked lunch, watered the plants, and smiled faintly when the neighbor waved from across the fence. Yet inside, every step felt heavy, as though I carried a secret too large for my frail body. The image of those two names burned against my eyelids whenever I blinked. That night, when my husband returned, he kissed my cheek with the same casual affection he always did. My daughter-in-law served tea, her hands steady, her voice gentle. I watched them both, my throat tight, wondering if I was staring at the two people who shared more than I was meant to know. And so the story began, not with shouting or slammed doors, but with silence. Silence heavier than any scream. Silence that pressed against my ribs and made it hard to breathe. For in my drawer lay a piece of paper, and on that paper were their names together. That silence, I knew, would not leave me. I have lived in this house for more than 30 years. Its walls are thick with memories paint that has faded with time, wooden beams that creak under the weight of age, and corners that still carry the smell of childhood laughter. It was here that I raised my son, where I cooked meals that filled the air with warmth, and where I buried my loneliness after my parents passed away. For all its weariness, the house has been a faithful witness to my life. When my son brought his wife here, I tried my best to make her feel welcome. I cleared out a room, painted the walls a soft cream, and pressed clean sheets with the scent of lavender. On the day she moved in, she thanked me politely, her voice barely above a whisper. She seemed nervous, eyes darting from one corner to another, as though the house itself was testing her. I remember patting her hand, telling her this was her home now too. She smiled then, a shy smile, and I believed her heart was kind. In the early months, everything felt smooth. She helped me with the cooking, often standing beside me at the stove, asking about recipes that had been in our family for generations. She listened when I spoke about my husband's stubborn ways, and she laughed softly at my old stories. My son looked happy, proud, as if he had chosen well. For a while I felt a new peace, as though the house had gained another daughter. But peace has a way of slipping quietly from one's grasp. Small things began to change, things I almost ignored at first. She no longer cooked with me but preferred ordering food from outside, saying it was quicker, more convenient. My son supported her choice, telling me I should rest instead of working so hard. My husband too praised her for bringing modern taste into the home. Their laughter, shared over delivered meals, sometimes made me feel like a guest at my own table. Then there were the glances. I do not know if others saw them, but I did. The way my husband looked at her when she spoke, not inappropriately but with a softness that unsettled me, and the way she would sometimes lower her eyes quickly, as if catching herself. Once, I walked into the living room unexpectedly and found them standing close, too close, speaking in voices that fell silent the moment they saw me. My husband explained it away. They had been discussing a bill, some household matter. I nodded, though my chest tightened. My son noticed nothing. Or perhaps he did and chose to ignore it. He was always busy, always chasing promotions, always rushing out with his briefcase in the morning and returning late at night. He left the house in their hands, his father and his wife, and me, of course, though at times I wondered if my presence mattered. The discovery of the hotel bill did not come to me in a vacuum. It fell upon soil already cracked. My heart had been gathering doubts like rain in a fragile basin. Still, I told myself that suspicion is poison, and a wife of many decades must not let it seep in so easily. Yet how could I banish the unease when each day seemed to feed it? One afternoon, before the hotel bill, I remember overhearing a conversation in the kitchen. My husband's voice, low and gentle, said, "You don't need to worry, I'll take care of it." And then her voice, equally soft, answered, "But what if she finds out?" I froze in the hallway, my hands gripping the frame of the door. When I stepped in, they both looked startled. My husband smiled, too quickly, and told me they were speaking about a broken appliance, something trivial. She nodded, eyes downcast. I wanted to believe them. I almost did. Now, with the hotel bill folded in my drawer, those words returned with a sharper edge. What if she finds out? What had they been referring to? My mind wove endless possibilities, each one more painful than the last. I tried to bury my thoughts in routine. Each morning I watered the garden, the dew still clinging to the leaves. Each afternoon I swept the porch, the broom scratching against the concrete in a rhythm that steadied me, but nothing could steady the weight inside. The paper in the drawer was like a pulse, beating, reminding me of what I knew and yet did not know. Sometimes at night, when the house grew quiet, I would hear faint laughter from the living room where the television flickered. My husband and daughter-in-law often stayed up late, while my son, exhausted, went to bed early. Their voices carried down the hall, sometimes blending into whispers I could not catch. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was a fool to stay silent or a fool to even suspect. There were moments of tenderness, too. She would bring me tea, place a shawl over my shoulders when I shivered. My husband would ask if I needed medicine, if my joints were aching. These gestures confused me more than anything else. How could those same hands, those same voices, be part of something so unthinkable? And so the seed of tragedy was sown not in shouts or quarrels, but in glances, whispers, and silences that clung to the air like invisible threads. The hotel bill was not an isolated storm. It was the lightning that revealed the landscape already darkened by clouds. I told myself I would wait for proof, for clarity, for the truth to reveal itself. But deep inside, I feared that the truth, once spoken, might be unbearable. The morning sun poured into the kitchen, golden and soft, yet I felt none of its warmth. I stood by the stove, stirring a pot of soup the way I had done for years, letting the steam rise against my face. My daughter-in-law walked in, her phone in one hand, her hair tied neatly, and her voice already busy with instructions to someone on the other end. She barely glanced at me as she set down her bag. "We'll just order lunch," she said quickly once the call ended. "It saves time." Her tone was casual, almost dismissive. My ladle paused in the pot. The soup bubbled quietly, as though offended by her words. I forced a smile. I've already prepared enough for everyone. Fresh vegetables from the market this morning. It would be a waste." She shrugged, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "People prefer variety these days. Delivery is easier. My husband likes it." By her husband, she meant my son, yet the way she said it felt like a small wall placed between us. When my son came home for lunch, true to her words, a delivery bag sat on the table. He kissed her cheek, praising her thoughtfulness, while my pot of soup cooled on the stove, untouched. He ate quickly, laughing at something she said, then left again, briefcase in hand, without so much as a spoonful of what I had prepared. My husband sat quietly during it all, his gaze drifting between the two of them. When I asked if he wanted soup, he shook his head, murmuring, "Next time." But his eyes lingered on her, not me, as though silently approving of her choices. That afternoon, I carried the heavy pot out to the yard and poured it away. The broth seeped into the earth, steam rising like ghosts. My hands trembled, not from the weight, but from the ache of being unseen. Conflicts in a household often begin not with storms, but with small wounds that bleed slowly. She began replacing the curtains with brighter colors, saying the old ones were too dull. My husband agreed, telling me the change made the house feel younger. She moved the furniture slightly. "For better flow," she explained. My son praised her taste. And I, who had chosen those curtains and arranged that furniture to hold decades of memories, was left silent, as though my presence mattered less than the shape of the room. Even the garden, which had been my solace, became another battleground. She said the flowers were outdated, that neighbors kept more modern plants. My husband laughed and suggested we should let the younger generation decide. I stood there with soil still clinging to my gloves, feeling as though the roots I had tended were being ripped out from under me. In the evenings, I sometimes overheard my son telling her, "Don't worry about Mother. She's old-fashioned. She'll come around." His words were meant to comfort her, but to me they were sharp knives. Old-fashioned. That was what I had become, a relic of another time, tolerated but not respected. The unease that had begun with glances now seeped into every meal, every conversation. When I looked at my husband, I wondered what he was thinking behind his calm face. When I watched my daughter-in-law move about the kitchen, I wondered if her kindness was genuine or calculated. The hotel bill in my drawer grew heavier with each passing day, though it was only paper. It whispered at night, reminding me of what I had seen, daring me to connect the dots between these daily slights and the shadow of betrayal. One evening, I walked into the living room and found them sitting side by side on the couch. The television was on, but neither seemed to be watching. Their conversation stopped the moment I appeared. My husband cleared his throat and reached for the remote, turning the volume up. My daughter-in-law smiled politely, rising to fetch me a cup of tea. I thanked her, my voice steady, but inside my chest my heart thudded like a trapped bird. The tea tasted bitter that night, though I knew she had added sugar the way I liked it. I set the cup down and excused myself early, retreating to my room where the folded bill lay hidden. I pulled it out, staring again at the names side by side, printed without shame, as though the hotel itself bore witness to something I was not meant to know. I pressed the paper flat against the table, whispering to myself, "Perhaps it means nothing. Perhaps it is all in my head." Yet my own words rang hollow. Each change in the house, each dismissal of my cooking, each glance and silence, they all gathered around the paper like shadows, feeding its weight. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, measured, neither hurried nor hesitant. They passed my door, continued down the corridor, and faded into the living room. A low murmur followed, voices too quiet to distinguish. I closed my eyes, but the sound pressed into me like a brand. I did not rise to confront them. Instead, I lay there, heart pounding, wondering if the silence I chose was protecting the family or destroying me piece by piece. And so, the small conflicts continued, weaving themselves into the fabric of our lives, each thread pulling tighter, each knot more difficult to undo. The tragedy had not erupted yet, but it had already begun, hidden beneath the surface where no one but me seemed willing to look. I woke before dawn and let the kettle sing. The house was so quiet the hall clock sounded like breathing. In the drawer by my bed, the hotel bill waited like a coal that would not cool. I promised I would not touch it today. One day of ordinary life, I told the steam, and watched it disappear. By 8, ordinary life returned with shoes and voices. My son kissed his wife and hurried out. My husband followed with his tie straight and his phone lit. "Coffee?" he asked without looking up. I poured. The cup cooled untouched. "We need the dining room tonight," my daughter-in-law said, carrying a notebook. "2 couples. Casual. Don't cook. I've ordered." "We have bones for stew," I said. "Lighter is better," she answered. "I'll handle the layout." I stood in the doorway and watched the room I had shaped learn a new grammar. She slid the table so the chandelier hung squarely. She laid a gauze runner, pale napkins, counted glasses that chimed. My husband steadied the stool while she lifted holiday plates from the high cabinet. They moved as if they had practiced. Reach, pass, nod. Something in me went quiet. At midday, I walked to the market and returned with bread and tomatoes, more out of habit than need. The house met me with a white flower candle and a brightness like a photograph. I ate at the counter, the knife ticking softly. From the dining room came the ding of glass and the pleasant business of competence. The house could hold both of us, I told myself. Guests arrived at 7 with damp scarves and laughter. My son came last, praising the night before it began. "You think of everything," he told his wife. I kept to the edges useful, invisible, bringing water, trading a bent fork for a straight one, catching a napkin before it slid. Twice I heard my name wrapped in velvet. "Mother keeps a very traditional house," my son said, and a woman I barely knew turned toward me with a polite smile. "You're lucky to have support," she told my daughter-in-law. Support landed like a thin blade. The food was flawless, the sort that makes no mess and leaves no memory. Compliments circled. My husband poured wine and leaned to speak in a low voice. I did not hear the beginning, only the end. The invoice from yesterday. The word touched the sore place where Bill already lived. My daughter-in-law's eyes flicked to me and then brightened. "Handled," she said, and the table's noise swallowed the rest. After dessert, laughter thinned. Coats were found, doors thanked. My son took recycling to the bin and returned smelling of wet cardboard. "Perfect evening," he told his wife. My husband thanked her too, voice light but formal, as if he were signing his name. "You saved me again," he joked, and did not look at me. We cleaned in a silence, trying to pass for comfort. I washed. She dried. He put stacks away and returned with the small satisfaction of alignment. Steam fogged the window and gave me back a softened face. When the sink quieted, my daughter-in-law set the towel down and spoke, almost gently. "Paperwork has been strange," she said. "Vendors print wrong names, duplicate lines, so many errors." The sentence sat between us like a plate no one had ordered. "I have believed stranger things," I said. "There's no reason to worry about something that isn't what it looks like," she went on. "Your son works hard. He shouldn't be dragged into small mistakes." Behind her, my husband's steps reached the doorway and paused. I did not turn. I folded the damp dishcloth in half, then in half again, as if exact corners could hold a day together. In my room later, I put my hand on the drawer and did not open it. I felt the varnish warm from the day. In the hall, the floor gave its tired sigh. In the living room, the candle burned down to a twisted spine. On the coffee table lay a pen I did not recognize, slim silver, the hotel's name etched along the clip. I lifted it. The metal was heavier than it looked. The name matched the one I would not read. I put the pen back where I had found it. I am careful with the position of objects when the position of people has slipped. Passing my son's door, I listened to the tide of his sleep. In the room we still called the guest room, though it no longer was, her notebook lay open on the desk, ruled with columns and dates. The word reservation appeared twice in neat blue ink, once crossed with a small, decisive line. I did not step inside. The doorway air felt like a held breath. I lay down fully dressed, as if some part of me expected to stand again. The house settled like an old animal that cannot find a comfortable spot. "Perhaps it means nothing," I told the ceiling. "Perhaps the world runs on receipts and errors and words that resemble one another." Outside, a car combed the wet street and turned the corner. Sleep came in shallow visits. I woke to footsteps in far rooms and could not tell whether they were real. I woke again to the memory of the silver pen and reached for the drawer, then stopped. If I took out the bill, I would keep it like a live coal. I let the paper lie where it lay and matched my breath to the floorboard that always sighs at midnight. Morning would arrive with coffee, keys, hurried promises. I told myself to be patient one more day. Patience, like paper, thins with handling. I had not learned that truth completely. I only knew the house was speaking a new grammar now, and every sentence I did not say added another silent word to it. The week after the dinner, rain visited daily, a gray curtain that blurred the street. I felt it in my joints and in the patience of the house. The drawer in my room seemed to hum when I passed it, as if a small engine lay under the varnish. I told myself I would not open it. Promises are easy in the morning and difficult at night. On Wednesday, my son came home early. The key scraped twice and his shoes struck the tile. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he asked, pulling at his tie. My daughter-in-law turned off the faucet and handed him a towel. "It was handled." "I didn't want to add to your stress." "What was handled?" I asked from the doorway. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "A hotel charge on our account. They sent a duplicate invoice. It's nothing." Hotel lit the air like a struck match. I looked at her. For the length of a breath her gaze held mine, then slid away. "A duplicate?" I asked. "Yes," she said quickly. "A clerical error. I called. They promised to correct it." Rain braided itself against the glass. My son muttered about incompetence, drained a glass of water, and walked down the hall. She stayed at the counter, aligning envelopes that were already aligned. From my husband's study drifted a thin ribbon of citrus cologne. Later, clearing the dining table, I found a white envelope half hidden beneath a magazine. The hotel crest was pressed into the flap, a small raised crown, empty but loud. I held it too long. My husband entered and saw what I was holding. His eyes dropped to the envelope, climbed to mine, and paused. "They send advertisements," he said. "Throw it away." He reached before I could decide, slid the envelope from my hand, and tucked it into his pocket. "No need for clutter," he added, smiling without softness. He left the room. The magazine looked suddenly like a disguise. That night I could not sleep. The house spoke in its night grammar pipes ticking, wood settling. At midnight I walked the dark hall without lights. In the living room my husband slept in the armchair, his phone glowing in his hand. A conversation thread shone on the screen, names blurred by the dim. I turned away. My heart practiced a coward's discipline. Look, but do not read. In the morning my son spoke about travel. "Work may send me out of town next month," he said. "A week, maybe longer." My daughter-in-law smiled over her cup. Across the table my husband's eyes met hers for an instant. My son saw only his toast. I saw the silence between glances. The day he left, the storm returned. Thunder rolled like a cart on a far road, and gutters shouldered brown water. He kissed his wife, called me mother the way men do when time is short, and went out with his suitcase. By evening, the sky bruised into violet. My daughter-in-law received a call. The light from her phone blued her face. "It's nothing," she said when she noticed me. "A mix-up at work." She went to her room and returned with her coat. At the same moment my husband stepped from his study, also carrying a coat. They stopped when they saw each other, a jolt of surprise, as if two mirrors had faced by accident. "Going out?" I asked. My hand found the table's edge because the floor felt unreliable. He nodded too quickly. "An errand." "An errand," she echoed, choosing the same word as if it were the last one left. The rain hammered the roof with both fists. They opened the door together and stepped into the weather, the wind stealing their last syllables. I stood in the corridor, listening to the quiet they left behind, a silence with teeth. Hours lengthened. I did not turn on a lamp. I watched the window become a dark square, then a darker square. The clock hands dragged. When the door finally opened, my husband entered first and shook rain from his umbrella as if performing a public act. Minutes later she came in alone, cheeks bright, hair wet in fine strands, a small paper bag folded shut in her hand, the kind boutiques give for delicate purchases. "You should sleep, Mother," she said, soft as lint. I nodded. My husband hung his coat on the hook and pressed the fabric flat with his palm, the gesture of a man making sure nothing shows. He moved down the hall. She moved down the hall. Between their footsteps sat a space I could not measure. In my room I opened the drawer at last. The paper lay where I had left it, obedient and sharp. I unfolded it the way a clerk opens a map. The ink was bold. The date had not grown older. The two names stood together as if they had agreed to stand together forever. My hands shook, and the bill trembled with them. "Tell me if I am wrong," I whispered. "Tell me." The paper did not answer. It is not paper's job to answer. It is only paper's job to exist, to wait for a hand to use it or a flame to erase it. I refolded the bill along its first crease, and then the second. The corners met neatly. I held the square of paper against my chest and felt the soft hammer of my heart try to beat through it. Outside, rain gave up its anger and settled into a steady fall, the sound of patience or of exhaustion, I could not tell which. I slipped the bill back into the drawer and closed it gently, as if quiet could make it less true. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house decide whether to sleep. The morning after the storm, the house smelled of damp fabric and faint cologne. I moved through it as though each room had shifted overnight. The drawer in my bedroom was heavier than the furniture around it, for inside lay the paper that did not change and would not explain. I told myself again that I would not open it. Instead, I opened my eyes wider during the day. If silence would be my shield, then observation would be my weapon. At breakfast, my daughter-in-law poured coffee, her hands steady, her voice gentle. My husband unfolded the newspaper with his usual precision, shaking it once before laying it flat. My son had already left for work. On the surface, the scene was ordinary, but I watched the details. When she placed the cup before my husband, his hand touched hers too long, too casually. She did not flinch. She simply moved on to buttering toast. I told myself to look, not accuse, to gather, not declare. A woman my age has learned that storms are not always loud. Sometimes they are careful. Later, while she was out at the market and my husband in his study, I went to her room. I had no plan. My hand simply turned the knob. Inside, her notebook sat open on the desk. I saw lines of dates and columns, the word reservation written, crossed out, then written again. A small pressed flower lay between the pages, the kind florists slip into bouquets as decoration. I touched nothing. I stood in the doorway breathing the faint scent of lavender soap and new paper. Then I stepped out, closing the door so quietly it did not click. That afternoon I swept the porch, and through the open window I heard voices inside hers and my husband's. Their tones were hushed, serious. I leaned closer, the broom still in my hand. "It was corrected," she said. "And no one else saw?" my husband asked. "Only briefly," but I explained. Their voices fell to a whisper too low to follow. The broom slid against the step with a dry rasp. I forced myself to continue sweeping, though my arms trembled. When I re-entered, they were in separate rooms, both with composed faces. In the evening, while setting the table, I noticed a small receipt on the counter. A boutique bag, the same kind she had carried in after the storm, was listed. One item only. A silk tie, men's, dark blue. My husband wore a new tie at dinner. My son complimented him, asking if it was a gift. My husband only smiled, chewing slowly, not answering. She filled the silence by asking about his day at work. My son answered, never questioning further. I began keeping a small record in my own notebook, not accusations, only observations. Wednesday, duplicate invoice. Friday, boutique tie. Saturday, voices in study, word corrected. Each entry felt like a thread. Perhaps I believed that if I gathered enough I could weave clarity, or perhaps I only wanted proof that my fear had shape. On Sunday, we went to church together. My son sat between his wife and me, holding her hand, singing softly. My husband bowed his head in prayer. To anyone watching, we were a family bound in devotion, but when the hymns ended, I noticed her glance across my son to my husband. The glance was brief, no longer than a breath, but I saw it. I held it in my memory like a stone. That afternoon, relatives visited. My cousin remarked on how radiant my daughter-in-law looked, how well my husband seemed to be aging. Compliments circled the room. I smiled where I was expected, but the words fell against me like hailstones, sharp, cold, leaving no mark but plenty of sting. When night came, I walked the halls. The house spoke in creaks and sighs. Outside, the rain had ended, leaving streets slick and shining. In the living room, the silver pen from the hotel had vanished. In its place lay a different pen, cheaper, ordinary. I searched the coffee table, the shelves, the side drawers. Nothing. It had been removed. The absence was louder than its presence. I returned to my room and sat on the bed. The drawer called to me. I opened it, unfolded the bill, and stared again at the names. They had not blurred, not faded, not excused themselves. My breath fogged the paper as though it were glass. "You are only ink," I told it, "but you have become my judge." I folded it carefully and placed it back, then pulled my own notebook close. I wrote, "Sunday night, the silver pen gone, silence louder than answers." As I set down the pen, a soft knock touched my door. I startled. It was her. She peeked in, smiling gently. "I thought you might want tea." She carried a tray with a cup and saucer, steam curling upward. I accepted it, thanked her. She lingered a moment, eyes sweeping the room, pausing near the drawer. Then she said, "You mustn't worry so much. Things are never as they appear." Her words were soft, almost kind, but I felt them settle on my skin like a veil. She left, and the hallway swallowed her steps. I looked down at the tea. It smelled of chamomile, calming. I drank, though my hands trembled. That night, I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, counting the shadows. Every creak, every whisper of the wind carried weight. My notebook lay open beside me, waiting for more words. I thought of the boutique receipt, the missing pen, the glance across the pew, the hushed voices, the hotel bill that would not vanish. I told myself again that I was only observing, only recording. But deep inside I knew. I was investigating, quietly, silently, in the only way I could. And though my son slept peacefully in his room, the family I had once believed unshakable now felt like a house standing on water. The following week, the air carried a brittle chill that crept beneath doors and settled in corners. I wore my shawl tighter around my shoulders, though the threads had thinned with age. The house bustled with new energy. My daughter-in-law had invited friends again, younger couples who filled the dining room with laughter that did not need me. I stayed mostly in the kitchen, my hands busy with small tasks that no one had asked me to do. "Mother, don't tire yourself," she called sweetly as I arranged fruit on a platter. "We already have enough food." Her words floated like kindness, but they landed like dismissal. I carried the platter out anyway, setting it near the edge of the table. One of the guests smiled politely, then returned to conversation. My husband raised his glass, complimenting her for organizing everything so well. I was invisible in the room I had built. When the evening turned to stories, I tried to join. I recalled a small tale from my son's childhood, how he once hid under the table during a thunderstorm. I smiled as I began, but my son interrupted with a laugh. "Mother exaggerates," he said, patting his wife's hand. "It wasn't like that at all." The table joined his laughter. My words dried in my throat. I returned to the kitchen, carrying empty cups that were not yet empty. From the sink I listened as my husband told a story about a business trip long ago. His details were vague, but my daughter-in-law leaned in, her questions precise, her laughter ringing at the right moments. Their voices meshed easily, weaving a sound that did not need me. I washed the same cup twice. Later, when the guests left, I expected to help clear the table. But she and my husband moved together, efficient, almost rehearsed. "You rest, Mother," she said firmly, guiding me toward the hall. My son stood by the door, thanking each guest, oblivious. I lingered in my room that night, restless. I opened my drawer again and touched the folded bill. The paper had begun to soften at the corners from my handling. I thought of the way the laughter had rolled past me at dinner, of my son correcting my memory as if it were faulty, of the attentive exchange between my husband and his daughter-in-law. The next morning I tried to speak to my son. I found him in the garden, trimming a hedge half-heartedly before work. "Do you ever notice," I began, "how your wife and your father speak together? Closely, often?" He looked at me with mild surprise. "That's good, isn't it? Families should get along." "But sometimes," I said carefully, "the closeness seems unusual." He frowned. "Mother, you worry too much. Don't invent things. You'll only hurt yourself." He wiped his hands on his trousers, kissed my cheek quickly, and left. His dismissal was gentle, but it landed like stone. That afternoon I overheard my daughter-in-law on the phone. She stood near the kitchen window, speaking softly. "No, it was handled," she said. "Yes, he doesn't know." Then silence. She glanced up and saw me. Her smile was quick, polished. "Just work confusion," she explained. "You know how paperwork is." I nodded, though the words settled like dust in my chest. The small humiliations grew sharper in the days that followed. At dinner, when I offered advice about seasoning, she corrected me. "Times have changed, Mother. Too much salt isn't healthy." My husband agreed instantly, lifting his spoon with approval. My son said nothing. During a visit from neighbors, someone complimented the flowers in the yard. She smiled and said she had chosen them. My husband nodded in confirmation. No one remembered that I had planted those bulbs years ago, kneeling in the dirt until my knees ached. I stood behind the curtain, unseen, watching her accept the praise. One evening, while folding laundry, I discovered another small paper tucked in my husband's jacket pocket. Not a bill this time, but a receipt from a restaurant across town. 2 meals listed, 1 bottle of wine. No names, no obvious proof, just numbers on thin paper. I held it in my palm, my breath shallow. At dinner that night, I placed the receipt silently under his plate. When he lifted the plate to serve himself, the slip of paper clung briefly before falling to the table. He glanced at it, then at me. His face did not change. He slid the receipt into his pocket without a word. My son asked what it was. "Just old business," my husband replied smoothly. My daughter-in-law sipped her water, eyes lowered. The silence that followed was more humiliating than if they had accused me of spying. I was not even worthy of confrontation. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Tuesday restaurant receipt, hidden, dismissed. Public silence more painful than denial." My handwriting shook, but I pressed the pen hard enough to dent the page. When I finally lay down, I thought of my life, decades of labor, of meals cooked, of nights waiting for my husband to return, of raising my son alone when work kept him busy. And now, I was treated as a shadow in my own house. Even the truth, if there was truth, belonged to others. I closed my eyes, but sleep refused. Somewhere in the house, faint laughter drifted through the walls. I could not tell if it belonged to the television or to them. I buried my face in the pillow, but the sound seeped through. And so, the first cracks of humiliation spread across my days, not in shouts or accusations, but in gentle corrections, polite dismissals, and silences that spoke louder than words. The world did not accuse me. It only erased me, slowly, steadily, until I wondered if I still existed outside the bill hidden in my drawer. On Friday, my son announced we would celebrate his promotion. "Nothing fancy," he said with pride, "just lunch at the new Riverside restaurant." He booked a table for all of us, his wife, my husband, and me. The morning was bright and cold, the river below the bridge flashing like a silver blade. I dressed with care, smoothing the creases from my best coat as if neatness might anchor me. The restaurant smelled of lemon, salt, and seared fish. Light slid across the glasses, scattering into constellations on the tablecloth. A hostess greeted us with practiced warmth. Then her smile turned more personal when her eyes found my husband and my daughter-in-law. "Welcome back," she said brightly. "Would you like the same table as last time?" Her words struck like a stone in still water. My son laughed easily. "Must be a mistake," he said, but the hostess had already led us toward the alcove by the window. My husband answered before anyone else. "Yes, that will do." His voice was calm, smooth, unhesitating. My daughter-in-law clutched her bag, her fingers tightening, then relaxing again. I sat opposite them, facing the river. Water never holds still. It accepts everything and carries it away. Perhaps I hoped it might carry away my thoughts. The waitress brought menus, describing specials with charm. "The grilled octopus your favorite," she said, placing the dish between my husband and my daughter-in-law. "You enjoyed it last time." Ordinary words, but they landed like thunder. My son speared a piece happily. "Great choice then," he said. My husband only nodded. My daughter-in-law pressed her napkin to her lips, hiding a flicker of something I could not name. I chewed bread slowly, tasting lemon, olive oil, salt. Why should a plate of octopus weigh more than the years I had given this family? Why should a stranger's memory sting harder than silence at home? As the meal went on, I tried to speak, but every word felt heavy. My son chatted about work. My husband asked questions, nodding thoughtfully. She leaned close, laughter ready, her voice bright. I lifted my glass and sipped water that tasted of metal. Midway through, the restaurant manager appeared with a young smile. "We're offering returning guests a small thank you," he said to my husband and daughter-in-law, placing an envelope on the table. "A complimentary dessert card." My son chuckled. Seems you two are the favorites here. He did not hear the silence that followed. My husband slipped the envelope into his jacket, smooth as a man folding a letter he had read before. My daughter-in-law lowered her eyes and cut her fish into neat squares. Something in me cracked, not loud, not visible, but inward, like fabric tearing under pressure. I lifted my napkin, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and asked softly, "When were you here last?" My husband turned his gaze to the river. "A client meeting," he replied. His tone was measured, confident. "She helped me choose the wine. You know she has excellent taste." "A client meeting," I repeated. Not a question, not an accusation. My son forced a smile, a little strained. "Mother, don't overthink, it was just lunch." He reached across the table, but his hand stopped halfway, unsure where to land. My daughter-in-law spoke at last. It was quick, nothing important. Her face was calm, her voice soft, but something beneath her words echoed too perfectly, like a line rehearsed. Desserts arrived, lemon tart, chocolate slice, sugared pears. "On the house," the waitress said, smiling at them. My son raised his fork cheerfully, declaring the day perfect. I tasted the pear. It was cool, sweet, flawless, and it slid down like water carrying away a shard. When we left, the hostess called after us, "See you soon." My husband held the door for my daughter-in-law. My son walked ahead, phone in hand, still glowing with promotion. I followed last, my steps heavy. At home, my son hurried back to the office, still giddy with success. My husband went to his study. My daughter-in-law placed the restaurant's paper bag on the counter, something the manager had slipped to her as we left. She kept her eyes on it, not on me. "The hostess remembered you," I said quietly. "She remembers everyone," she replied. "It's her job." "And the manager too?" "They're trained for hospitality." She lifted her chin, but her eyes slid sideways. My husband entered then, glancing at the bag. "Let's not turn crumbs into a feast," he said mildly. He opened the bag, took the envelope, and slid it into a drawer with old menus and appliance manuals. "See? Harmless." He smiled, the smile of a man who believed he had restored order. When they left the kitchen, I opened the drawer. The envelope lay among the papers, white and quiet. I did not touch it. I only looked until the hum of the refrigerator filled my ears, steady as a heartbeat. Then I closed the drawer slowly, as if silence could preserve dignity. That night, my son showed us a photo taken at the restaurant, all of us by the window, the river shining behind. In the picture, my husband and my daughter-in-law leaned slightly toward each other, drawn by the camera's angle or by habit. I was there too, smiling politely, the way people smile when told 1, 2, 3. When the house slept, I returned to my drawer. The hotel bill waited, unchanged, patient. I lifted it halfway, then set it back down. "Not yet," I whispered. The paper said nothing, but its silence carried more weight than any word. The following Sunday, the house was crowded. My son insisted we host a family lunch to celebrate again, this time inviting relatives and a few close neighbors. "It's good to share our joy," he said, already calling the caterer before I could suggest cooking. I wanted to prepare the meal myself, to fill the air with the sense of onion, garlic, and broth, but my daughter-in-law overruled gently. "Let's keep it simple," she said. "We'll order, that way everyone can relax." The morning found me standing in the kitchen anyway, hands restless. I boiled water, chopped vegetables, prepared a soup no one had requested. The knife moved with stubborn rhythm, each cut a small defiance. When my daughter-in-law walked in, she smiled politely. "You didn't have to. Everything is already taken care of." "I know," I answered, my voice calm, "but habits don't vanish as quickly as menus." She tilted her head as though considering whether to press further, then turned back to her phone, her fingers tapping out arrangements. My husband entered soon after, asked if the catering truck had arrived, and walked out, without glancing at the pot simmering on the stove. By noon, the dining room filled with voices. Relatives laughed, neighbors clapped my son on the back, congratulating him. Platters arrived, grilled meats, bright salads, glossy desserts, dishes far flashier than my modest soup. I set my pot discreetly at the end of the table, as though asking permission for it to belong. When everyone sat, my son raised a glass. "To family," he declared. Glasses clinked, light scattered. I smiled and lifted my own, though my hand trembled slightly. Conversation swirled easily. My cousin praised the decor. "This house feels so alive, so modern now," she said, nodding toward my daughter-in-law. My husband agreed readily, describing how she had improved the dining space. I opened my mouth to add that the curtains had once been my choice, the arrangement my care, but my words dried. The table had moved on. Then someone reached for my pot. A neighbor ladled a bit of soup into her bowl and tasted. She smiled kindly. "It's very traditional, reminds me of my grandmother." Before I could thank her, my daughter-in-law laughed lightly. "Mother still prefers her recipes from long ago. We tease her sometimes about being old-fashioned." She turned to the others, smiling. "You know how elders are always clinging to the past." The table chuckled. My husband added, "Yes, she won't give up those old stews." Their amusement was gentle, not cruel, but it stung sharper than open scorn. I sat quietly, spoon resting in my hand, the taste of salt and bitterness on my tongue. My cousin leaned close, whispering, "Don't mind them. It's just teasing." She meant comfort, but comfort often comes too late. As the afternoon stretched, conversation shifted to travel. My son spoke proudly of a potential overseas assignment. "It would mean a lot for my career," he said. My daughter-in-law's eyes shone. "We could all manage fine here," she assured him. My husband nodded, voice calm, promising support. I wanted to ask who exactly she meant by we. I wanted to ask whether my presence had already been written out, but I kept my lips pressed, afraid that opening them would spill more than words. Near the end of the meal, a neighbor complimented the restaurant where we had celebrated. "Beautiful place," she said. "We were there last month. The staff are so attentive, they never forget a face." Her comment was casual, but it sharpened the air. My husband shifted slightly in his chair. My daughter-in-law's fork paused midair before lowering again. My son nodded eagerly, oblivious. "Yes, we were just there." They remembered us immediately. The table laughed, impressed by such service. Only I sat stiff, the sound echoing in my ears. Remembered. Yes, they remembered. I excused myself under the pretense of checking on tea. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, breathing shallowly. My soup pot sat half full, barely touched. The steam had died, leaving only a faint skin across the surface. I lifted the ladle, tasted, and found it bland, though I had seasoned it carefully. Perhaps salt cannot survive laughter. When I returned, conversation had moved on to holidays. My husband and daughter-in-law exchanged a glance as my son described his travel plans. It was a quick glance, easily missed. But I saw it, stored it, folded it into the drawer of my mind beside the bill. After the guests left, my son hugged me. "Everyone had such a good time," he said, smiling. "You should rest more and stop worrying about details." His praise was gentle, but it carried the sting of dismissal. Rest more. Do less. Fade quietly. That night, alone in my room, I opened my drawer and unfolded the bill again. The paper had begun to crease unevenly from my constant touch. The ink remained sharp. 2 names, side by side, bold as if carved into stone. I whispered, "They laughed at my soup today. They called me old-fashioned." The paper gave no reply. I folded it once more, slid it back, and sat listening to the house. Down the hall, muffled voices drifted from the living room, my husband's low murmur, my daughter-in-law's brighter tone. My son had already gone to bed. The voices blurred into laughter, then into silence. I lay down without undressing, staring at the ceiling. My notebook lay open beside me. I wrote one line, Sunday laughter over my soup, neighbors' words about memory, silence heavier than denial. The pen pressed deep into the page, leaving a groove I could feel even after the ink dried. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. The darkness settled like an audience waiting for the next act. The morning after the family lunch, the house carried the faint smell of leftovers. Trays of catered food sat in the refrigerator, stacked neatly but without warmth. My pot of soup had been scraped into a container no one would touch. I spooned a bit into a bowl for myself and ate in silence, tasting nothing. My son left early, rushing to the office with his usual briskness. My husband retreated into his study, door closed, voice occasionally low on the phone. My daughter-in-law moved through the house like a soft shadow, tidying plates, folding tablecloths, humming. Her humming had become constant, as if music could polish over cracks. That afternoon, while dusting the living room shelves, I noticed a small envelope tucked between two books. I slid it out carefully. A restaurant receipt different from the one I had found before, dated only a week earlier. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, 1 dessert, no names, no signatures. Yet the memory of the hostess's "welcome back" and the manager's envelope returned sharply. My hands trembled as I folded it again and returned it exactly as I had found it. In the evening, my son called from work to say he would be late. Dinner was quiet, only the 3 of us. My husband and my daughter-in-law spoke about errands, about household expenses, about the electricity bill. Their voices meshed easily, slipping from one subject to another without pause. I ate slowly, chewing rice that turned tasteless in my mouth. Afterward, I carried my tea to the porch. The night air was cool, stars faint beyond city lights. Through the window I saw them inside, bent over a sheet of paper, discussing figures. Her finger traced a line, his pen scribbled notes. They leaned close, too close for comfort. I turned my face away, breathing the night air until my lungs ached. The next morning brought a small shock. While folding laundry, I discovered a lipstick stain on the collar of my husband's shirt. The color was pale, almost invisible, but there. My breath caught. I compared it to the shade my daughter-in-law often wore. The match was too close to ignore. When I confronted him gently, "There is a mark here, did you notice?" He laughed. "Perhaps from a greeting, a cousin, a neighbor. These things happen." He brushed it away with his hand as though smearing evidence into fabric. My daughter-in-law entered then, carrying folded towels. Her eyes flicked to the shirt, then to me, quick as a bird. "I'll wash it again," she offered, calm, composed. I watched the shirt vanish into the laundry basket, the pale stain swallowed by cloth. My chest tightened, but my lips stayed closed. Later that week, while watering the garden, I overheard her on the phone again. Her voice was low, urgent. "We can't let him know," she said. Silence followed then. It was only once, but still, we must be careful. I froze, hose dripping water onto my shoes. She ended the call quickly when she saw me. "Just a friend," she explained too quickly. "She worries too much." She smiled, but her smile trembled at the edges. That night, when my son returned home, I tried to speak. "Your wife. She seems troubled lately. Have you noticed?" He frowned, distracted, already checking emails on his phone. "She's fine, Mother. You're reading into things again. Don't burden yourself." Reading into things. The phrase clung to me like damp cloth. I went to my room, opened the drawer, and unfolded the bill once more. The ink did not fade. The name stared back, bold, united. I placed the bill beside the new receipt and the memory of the lipstick stain. Pieces of a puzzle that refused to lock. Perhaps they belonged together, perhaps not. The ambiguity was a prison. On Saturday, the revelation came not from objects but from a voice. My husband had stepped out for errands. My son was away, and only she remained. She entered my room carrying tea. Setting it on the table, she looked at me steadily. "Mother," she said, her tone soft but deliberate, "sometimes you see things differently than they are. Sometimes papers and stains and words mislead. Please don't let suspicion ruin the peace of this house." Her words were kind, almost pleading, but beneath them lay another layer, knowledge that I had seen, that I had collected, that I had begun to connect. She was asking me not only for silence, but for blindness. I nodded slowly, though my chest tightened. "Peace," I repeated. "Yes, peace." She left, closing the door gently behind her. I sat alone, staring at the steam rising from the cup, wondering if the tea carried comfort or warning. That evening, my husband returned with a new tie, still wrapped in its boutique paper. My son praised it, asking where it had come from. "A gift," my husband said lightly. He did not say from whom. My daughter-in-law smiled faintly and served the rice. I looked at the tie, at the folded paper wrapping, at the bill hidden in my drawer. Revelation was not a single moment, but a series of small cuts, each one drawing just enough blood to sting but never enough to kill. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Lipstick on his collar, whispered call about being careful, gift tie with no giver, each piece sharp, yet none whole." I closed the notebook with hands that shook. The truth hovered like smoke present, suffocating, yet impossible to grasp. The week began with a strange quiet. My son left earlier than usual, rushing through breakfast with his phone already in hand. My husband spent more hours in his study, the door closed, his voice low on calls. My daughter-in-law busied herself with errands and household lists, always moving, always humming. The hum was light, cheerful to the ear, but to me it sounded like a screen meant to block silence from speaking too loudly. On Tuesday afternoon, while retrieving linens from the storage cabinet, I discovered a folder wedged between blankets. It did not belong there. Inside were photocopies of hotel invoices, 3 of them, each with the same names side by side. The dates stretched back weeks. My breath faltered. I held the papers with both hands, the edges cutting faint lines into my skin. I listened for footsteps, for doors opening, but the house remained still. Slowly, carefully, I returned the folder to its place. My fingers trembled as I closed the cabinet, but my mind was clearer than it had been in days. It was not one mistake. It was not one coincidence. There were patterns now. That evening, I tried to mention it delicately. At dinner, I asked, "How often do you travel for meetings?" My husband glanced up, his chopsticks pausing midair. "As often as necessary," he said. My daughter-in-law added smoothly, "He works hard, Mother, you know that." "I found papers," I whispered. "Invoices." The room froze for a breath. My son looked between us, frowning. My husband's expression did not shift. "Old files," he said calmly. "You must have seen drafts or duplicates. Nothing important." My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her smile gentle. "Please don't worry. We manage the household accounts together. Sometimes things get filed strangely." Her words were silk covering stone. My son sighed. "Mother, you keep noticing little things. Try to rest." His voice was weary, not cruel, but it carried the weight of dismissal. The conversation moved on to work, to neighbors, to the price of groceries. I chewed slowly, tasting only ash. Later that night, I opened my notebook. 3 invoices found. Same names. Denial offered too quickly. My handwriting tilted unevenly. I pressed the pen so hard the letters cut grooves in the page. The next day, while folding laundry in my daughter-in-law's room, I noticed her purse half open on the chair. A slip of paper jutted out a hotel loyalty card, stamped twice. My heart hammered. I did not remove it. I only stared until my eyes blurred. Then I tucked it back exactly as it had been. That evening, when she handed me tea, I studied her face. She looked tired, her smile thinner than usual. "You don't sleep well," she said softly. "Do you?" I asked. Her eyes flickered, then steadied. "Sleep comes and goes," she answered, before leaving the room. The following day brought an unexpected visitor. The mail carrier handed me a letter addressed to my husband. The return address was the same hotel. My hands shook as I carried it inside. My husband arrived moments later, saw the envelope, and snatched it from the table with unusual haste. "Promotional mail," he said curtly, slipping it into his jacket. He left the house without another word. When my son came home that evening, I tried again. "Your father receives letters from hotels. Does that not strike you as odd?" He looked at me with tired patience. "Mother, please, you're seeing ghosts where none exist. Father has business contacts everywhere. Don't invent problems." "Then why does your wife know so much about the invoices?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Because she helps with accounts. Because she is responsible. And because she cares about this family." He set his briefcase down with a thud. "You should be grateful, not suspicious." I said nothing. Gratitude is easy when truth is clear. When truth is hidden, gratitude tastes like dust. That night, I returned to the storage cabinet. The folder was gone. The linens lay neatly stacked, undisturbed. I pressed my hand against the empty space, feeling the absence like a bruise. In my room, I unfolded the original bill again. The paper seemed thinner now, worn from my touch. The ink still bold, the names still sharp. I placed it beside my notebook, beside the memory of the loyalty card, beside the echo of the missing folder. I asked the silence, "If it is all a mistake, why does it repeat?" The silence answered with the creak of floorboards in the hall. I listened. 2 sets of footsteps passed, one heavy, one light, pausing near my son's room, then moving away. I held my breath until they faded. Before sleep, I wrote in my notebook, Evidence appears, then vanishes. Patterns grow, explanations thin. The house is full of shadows with familiar voices. I closed the book, placed it atop the drawer, and lay down. The darkness pressed gently against my eyelids. In dreams, I walk through a hotel corridor, doors lining both sides, each door marked with their names. I knocked, but no one answered. The corridor stretched endlessly, the carpet swallowing my steps. When I woke, the dream clung to me like a damp garment. The house was quiet. My husband had already gone. My daughter-in-law hummed faintly in the kitchen. My son still slept, his face peaceful, innocent. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the drawer. The bill lay inside, waiting. It would wait forever. The days after the missing folder weighed heavily on me. I felt as though pieces of the truth kept surfacing like driftwood, only to be pulled back under by invisible hands. Every object I touched seemed to carry a second meaning. Even the clink of dishes, the shuffle of papers, the rhythm of footsteps, they all whispered stories I was not meant to hear. On Tuesday, I entered the study to dust while my husband was out. The desk was neat, too neat. A small drawer resisted when I pulled, then gave way with a sigh. Inside lay a stack of receipts clipped together. Not hotel invoices this time, but restaurant bills, boutique slips, theater tickets. Each bore dates from recent months. 2 meals, always 2, never 3. My throat tightened. I traced the neat printed lines with my finger, then returned them precisely as I found them. That evening, at dinner, my son announced plans for another business trip. Just 3 days this time, he said. I'll leave Thursday morning. My daughter-in-law's smile was composed, but I saw the faint spark in her eyes. My husband nodded calmly. We'll manage here, he said. I nearly spoke, nearly told my son about the folder, the receipts, the stains, the silences. But the words caught in my throat, thick as wool. He looked tired, so proud of his promotion, so eager for his future. To burden him felt like betrayal. And yet, wasn't silence the greater betrayal? That night, I wrote in my notebook, receipts, always 2. Never my son, never me. My hand shook, the words slanted across the page. On Wednesday, the mail brought another envelope from the hotel. This time it was addressed to my daughter-in-law. I held it for a moment, the weight too heavy for paper. She came quickly, taking it from my hands with a practiced smile. Promotional mail, she said, echoing my husband's words from before. She tore it open at the counter. Inside was a voucher for discounted stays, embossed with the hotel's crest. She folded it neatly, slipped it into her purse, and thanked me as though I had done her a favor. Later that evening, I passed by their voices in the living room. My husband and she sat close, reviewing something on her laptop. Their heads leaned together, the glow of the screen painting their faces in the same pale light. I lingered in the hallway, invisible. Are you sure it won't show? She asked softly. It's taken care of, my husband replied. No one else will see. I stepped back before they could notice me, my heart pounding. I returned to my room and opened my drawer, pulling out the bill again. The names looked bolder in the lamplight, as if growing stronger with each denial. The next day, after my son left for work, I found my daughter-in-law in the garden trimming flowers. She placed blossoms in a vase with careful hands. When she noticed me, she smiled. Beauty makes a house peaceful, don't you think? I looked at the flowers, bright, delicate, arranged perfectly. Peace, I repeated, though the word tasted bitter. She hesitated, then added, sometimes protecting peace means leaving things as they are, even if they look different. Her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. It was not a confession, not exactly. It was an acknowledgement of the silence between us, a contract written without ink. That evening, my husband wore his new tie, the one wrapped in boutique paper days before. My son complimented him, saying he looked distinguished. My husband laughed. My daughter-in-law adjusted the knot, her fingers lingering a moment too long. My son noticed nothing. I saw everything. After dinner, as I cleared the plates, I found another receipt slipped near the bread basket. This one listed a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. No food, just wine. The date matched the night of the storm when they had both left together. My breath caught. I carried it to my room, laid it beside the bill, the loyalty card, the memories. The pieces grew heavier, sharper, impossible to ignore. Yet none of them spoke the whole truth. They only circled it like wolves around prey. Before bed, I wrote in my notebook, "Evidence multiplies. Words grow fewer. The silence thickens." When the house settled into sleep, I wandered the hallway. From behind my son's door came the steady breath of rest. From the living room came a faint glow. I crept closer, silent on bare feet. Through the half-open door I saw them, my husband and my daughter-in-law sitting together on the couch. A folder lay open between them. He pointed to something. She nodded. Their voices were low, but I caught one phrase, "We must keep it quiet." I retreated before they could notice, my heart racing. I closed my bedroom door and pressed my back against it. I whispered into the darkness, "Quiet for whom? Quiet for what?" The questions dissolved into silence. I did not sleep. I lay awake until morning, staring at the ceiling. The drawer by my bed seemed to breathe, waiting. By the time my son left for his 3-day business trip, the house felt like a stage emptied of its audience. His absence shifted the balance, leaving only 3 of us: my husband, my daughter-in-law, and me. The silence grew thicker, almost deliberate, as though the house itself waited for something to break. On the first evening, dinner was awkwardly polite. My daughter-in-law served rice, my husband poured water, and I sat opposite them. Their voices were measured, their glances careful. But caution cannot erase history. It only paints over it with thin strokes that fade too quickly. Later, I walked into the living room to find them side by side on the couch, a laptop open between them. When they saw me, my husband closed it quickly. Too quickly. My daughter-in-law smiled. "We were checking household accounts," she explained. The phrase had become her shield, repeated until it lost shape. That night, I could not sleep. I opened the drawer and unfolded the bill again. I laid it beside the restaurant receipts, the boutique paper, the memory of lipstick on a collar. I whispered, "What are you hiding from me?" The paper, as always, gave no reply. The next morning, while watering the garden, I overheard voices drifting from the study window. My husband's tone was firm. "It must remain between us." Her reply came low, urgent. "I know, but what if she already suspects?" "She suspects everything," he answered. "That makes her easier to dismiss." The words cut sharper than any blade. Easier to dismiss. I dropped the hose, water splattering across my shoes. When I entered the house moments later, they were in the kitchen, speaking lightly about groceries. Neither mentioned the study, neither acknowledged the wet hem of my skirt. That afternoon, my cousin arrived unannounced, bringing homemade pastries. We sat at the table, sipping tea. She glanced around the redecorated room, her eyes catching the gauzy runner, the new curtains, the altered arrangement. "Your daughter-in-law has such modern taste," she remarked. "Your husband must appreciate the freshness." Her words were innocent, but they pressed into me like a thumb on a bruise. I smiled faintly, changed the subject, and passed the pastries. My husband entered mid-visit, complimenting the pastries warmly, his hand brushing my daughter-in-law's shoulder as he moved past her. My cousin did not notice, but I did. The gesture was small, fleeting, but heavy with unspoken meaning. That night I wrote in my notebook, "He says I suspect everything. Easier to dismiss me. They do not know the weight of silence. It is heavier than words." On the second day, while tidying my son's room, I discovered an envelope beneath a stack of his documents. It was from the same hotel, unopened. My son had scribbled across it, "For father." My breath caught. I turned it over, traced the seal, then replaced it exactly as it had been. When I returned to the hall, my daughter-in-law stood there. Her eyes flicked to the door, then to my hands. "Looking for something?" she asked. "No," I said softly. "Just cleaning." She smiled gently, but the smile felt like a warning. That evening, my husband suggested we dine out. "It will be easier," he said. We went to a restaurant not far from the hotel itself, the glow of its sign reflected in the car window as we drove past. My chest tightened. My daughter-in-law glanced at the sign, then looked away quickly, as though the sight burned. During the meal, I hardly tasted the food. I watched them instead. The way he poured her tea before his own, the way she handed him a napkin without being asked, the way their words overlapped seamlessly. My silence was not noticed, or perhaps it was convenient not to notice. Back home, I excused myself and went directly to my room. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Hotel envelope in my son's room. Marked for father." What truths travel between their hands? Sleep eluded me again. I rose near midnight and walked the hall. From the living room came faint light. I paused at the doorway. They sat together, a folder open on the table. Papers were spread out like maps. I caught fragments, statement, signature, arrangements. My husband leaned close, pointing to a line. My daughter-in-law nodded, her hair falling forward, brushing his sleeve. I stepped back before they could see me. My breath was sharp, my heart unsteady. I returned to my room, shut the door, and pressed my back against it. The house around me seemed to hold its breath, too. I opened the drawer and lifted the bill. "Am I mad?" I whispered. "Or am I the only one awake?" The paper lay silent, but its silence had become louder than any voice. By the third day, I felt worn thin. My son would return soon, his suitcase rolling into a house that no longer belonged to him. I wondered if he would notice the difference in air, the weight of silence, the careful choreography between his wife and his father. Or would he simply smile, hug them both, and believe everything was as it should be? That afternoon I stood in the garden, the sun weak behind clouds, and asked the flowers if truth mattered when no one else would name it. The flowers, like the bill, like the silence, gave no answer. My son returned from his trip on a Thursday evening, suitcase rattling over the tiles, his face bright with relief. He kissed his wife quickly, embraced me warmly, and greeted his father with pride in his eyes. "Everything went smoothly," he announced. "The meetings, the presentation better than I expected." The house glowed with his energy. For a brief moment, I wanted to believe his presence would dissolve the shadows that had gathered in his absence. But shadows do not vanish when the sun returns. They only shift position. That night, while unpacking, he asked his wife if any mail had arrived. She handed him a small stack. Among them was a letter with the hotel crest. My son frowned, turning it in his hands. "Strange. Why would this come here?" My husband stepped forward quickly. "Business partners often use hotels for correspondence," he explained. His voice was calm, but his hand reached out too fast, plucking the letter from my son's grip before he could protest. My son laughed lightly. "If you say so." He moved on. Speaking of flights and colleagues, I saw my daughter-in-law glance at my husband, her face perfectly composed. The letter disappeared into his jacket pocket. The next day, my son insisted we all dine together to celebrate properly. He invited friends, neighbors, colleagues. The dining room brimmed with voices, the table heavy with food. Glasses clinked, laughter swelled, stories rolled across the room. I moved quietly, filling bowls, straightening plates, the invisible hand behind the performance. Halfway through the meal, one of my son's colleagues leaned back, smiling. "You know, I saw your wife and father at the Riverside Hotel last month," he said casually. "What a coincidence. I was there for a seminar. They looked so focused, must have been important business." The words dropped like a stone into water. The table stilled. My son blinked, confused. "My wife? And my father?" My husband's laugh was quick, rehearsed. Yes, she was helping me with some arrangements. Paperwork for an event, nothing more." My daughter-in-law added smoothly, "I only accompanied him for an hour. It was tedious, really." The colleague chuckled, oblivious to the tension. "Well, it's good when family supports each other." Then he returned to his meal. But the silence that followed lingered like smoke. My son forced a smile, lifting his glass again. "To family," he said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The guests joined, clinking glasses, laughter returning in hesitant waves. I sat frozen, my spoon heavy in my hand. The moment passed quickly for the table, but not for me. I saw the flicker in my son's eyes, the strain in his smile, the way his gaze darted between his wife and his father. Something had shifted. When the guests departed, the house felt fragile, as if even a whisper could crack it. My son carried plates to the kitchen, his movements sharp. My daughter-in-law followed, speaking lightly about leftovers. My husband poured himself a drink, staring at nothing. Later, in the quiet of the night, I heard raised voices. My son's voice, low but strained. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice answered softly, too soft to carry. My husband's voice entered, firm, commanding. It was business, that's all. Silence followed, then footsteps scattering. I stood in the hallway, my hand on the wall, listening as though the plaster itself could reveal more. But the words had ended. Only the quiet remained, heavy, suffocating. The next morning my son was subdued. He spoke little, avoided my eyes. My daughter-in-law moved through the kitchen with brisk efficiency. My husband read the newspaper, his face a mask. I walked to the garden, carrying my notebook. I sat on the bench beneath the thinning sky and wrote, "The world has heard, not from me, but from chance." And still, denial dresses itself in calm voices. Truth stands behind glass, visible but untouchable. That evening I found another envelope in the trash hotel stationery again, torn in half. I pieced the fragments together on the counter, the ink still sharp. It was an invitation for a loyalty dinner, addressed to both my husband and my daughter-in-law by name. Not a clerical error, not a coincidence. Their names written together deliberately, confidently. I stared at the fragments until the words blurred. My son entered the kitchen then, glancing at the torn paper. His eyes lingered, puzzled, then wary. "What's that?" Before I could answer, my husband appeared, sweeping the pieces into his hand. "Junk mail," he said smoothly, dropping them into the bin again. His voice was steady, but his hand trembled faintly as he pressed the lid closed. My son watched, silent, his jaw tight. My daughter-in-law busied herself at the sink, her back turned, shoulders stiff. That night, in my room, I opened the drawer and spread everything across the table. The original bill, the receipts, the lipstick memory, the loyalty card, the fragments from the trash. A map of silence, a web of denial. I whispered, "What if he finally sees? What if he already knows?" The papers lay still, patient, waiting for the next moment of fracture. I closed the drawer gently, as though tucking in a restless child, and lay awake listening to the fragile walls of our house. Sleep abandoned me. Night after night, I lay awake listening to the house creak beneath its secrets. My son's breathing, steady behind his door, contrasted with the muted voices that sometimes drifted from the living room low, cautious, threaded with silences too deliberate to be innocent. One evening, unable to bear the walls pressing in, I opened the drawer and spread the evidence across my bed: the hotel bill, the receipts, the loyalty card, the torn stationery. A collage of silence, every piece whispering the same refrain: together, together, together. I wept not loudly, but with the deep, exhausted sobs of someone who has carried too much alone. The tears stained the paper, smearing nothing. Ink, unlike people, does not dissolve so easily. The next morning, my son announced he had to attend another out-of-town meeting, only 2 days this time. He kissed his wife, promised to call, and left with his usual briskness. I stood by the door, my heart sinking as the suitcase wheels rattled out of earshot. The moment he was gone, the house shifted again, returning to its fragile balance of 3. That evening, while setting the table, I noticed something unusual. 2 glasses of wine already poured, side by side. My husband and daughter-in-law were in the study, voices hushed. I watched from the kitchen doorway, unseen. He leaned over her shoulder, pointing to a document. She laughed softly, her hand brushing his arm. The intimacy was unmistakable. Something in me snapped. I stepped forward, the sound of my footsteps sharp on the floor. They looked up, startled. My husband's expression hardened. Her smile froze. "What are you hiding?" I asked, my voice trembling yet loud enough to fill the room. My husband straightened, his jaw tight. "Nothing that concerns you." "Nothing?" I held out the torn stationery I had pieced together. "Then explain this. Invitations, receipts, bills, all with both your names." My daughter-in-law's face paled, but her composure returned quickly. "Mother," she said softly, "please, you're misunderstanding. We've explained before, it's household business." "Business does not leave lipstick on collars," I snapped. My hands shook so violently the paper rattled. Silence stretched. My husband's eyes narrowed. "Enough," he said firmly. "You will drive yourself mad with these fantasies." "Fantasies?" I whispered. I laid the bill on the table between us. "This is not fantasy. This is ink. This is truth. My daughter-in-law glanced at the paper, then at him. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear cross her face. He pressed his hand over the bill, hiding the names as if that could erase them. "Stop," he said, his voice low, commanding. "For your own sake." Tears blurred my vision. For my own sake, or for yours? Before either could respond, my son's voice cut through the air. He had returned unexpectedly, briefcase still in his hand. "What's going on?" The room froze. My husband withdrew his hand from the bill. My daughter-in-law stepped back, her composure cracking. My son's eyes moved from one face to another, then dropped to the paper on the table. He picked it up, scanning the words. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low, trembling. My husband began to speak, but my son silenced him with a raised hand. He looked at his wife. "Answer me." Her lips parted, but no words came. She lowered her eyes, her hands clasping tightly together. My son's face went pale. He turned to me, confusion and hurt colliding in his expression. "Mother, how long have you known?" I wanted to say everything. I wanted to spill the nights of silence, the receipts, the overheard whispers, but the words caught in my throat. My tears answered for me. My husband stepped forward, his voice calm but heavy. "It is not what you think." "Then what is it?" my son demanded, his voice breaking. No one spoke. The silence was louder than any confession. My son dropped the bill back onto the table, the paper fluttering like a wounded bird. He turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall, a door slamming behind him. The three of us stood frozen, bound by the sound of that slam. My daughter-in-law sank into a chair, her face in her hands. My husband stared at the closed door, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. I stood trembling, my body weak from release and regret. I had wanted truth, but truth had arrived like a storm, tearing instead of cleansing. That night, the house did not sleep. I heard my son pacing, my daughter-in-law crying softly, my husband pouring drink after drink. I sat in my room, the drawer open, the papers spread before me. For the first time, I wished I had burned them all, wished I had lived blind. But blindness cannot be chosen once the eyes have seen. I wrote in my notebook with shaking hands. The truth has surfaced, but no one dares to name it. Silence has become our only language, and it is killing us. The morning after the storm of voices, the house carried a hollow quiet. Not peace, never peace, but the uneasy stillness that follows when words have struck too hard. My son did not join us for breakfast. His door remained closed, his footsteps muted. My daughter-in-law moved carefully, as though each sound might trigger collapse. My husband sat at the table, newspaper open but unread. I brewed tea, the kettle shrieking louder than it should, a reminder that silence is never complete. When my son finally emerged, his face was drawn, pale, his eyes shadowed. He said little, only that he had to leave for work. He kissed his wife quickly, nodded to his father, and left without meeting my gaze. The sound of the front door closing carried finality, as if a chapter had ended. The day dragged. My daughter-in-law busied herself with cleaning that did not need to be done, polishing already shining surfaces, rearranging objects that were already in order. My husband retreated to his study, door shut, his voice low on the phone. I wandered the house, restless, haunted by echoes of last night. In the evening, my son returned later than usual. He avoided the dining table, saying he had eaten already. He spent the night in his room, door locked. Through the thin walls I heard pacing, then stillness, then pacing again. My chest ached with the rhythm of it. On the second day, the rift widened. My son left early, his farewell clipped. My daughter-in-law's eyes followed him, filled with fear. My husband said nothing, simply sipped his coffee with deliberate calm. I wanted to scream, to demand that they speak truth at last, but my voice remained trapped inside me. That afternoon, while folding laundry, I found my son's shirt balled at the bottom of the basket. On it, faint traces of tears stained the fabric near the collar. My hand lingered on the cloth. My son was breaking quietly, just as I was. But he still did not come to me. Perhaps he did not know whether I was savior or conspirator. That night, a sharp exchange cracked the silence. My son confronted his wife in their room. His voice rose raw. "How could you keep this from me?" Her reply was muffled, sobbing. My husband's deeper voice cut in, urging calm. The three voices tangled, then fell into silence. I stood in the hallway, trembling, wanting to knock, to break in, but my legs would not move. I returned to my room, clutching the drawer handle as though it could anchor me. The next morning, my son emerged with red-rimmed eyes. He kissed my forehead quickly before leaving. The gesture was tender, but his eyes did not meet mine. My daughter-in-law stood at the window, arms wrapped around herself. My husband read the newspaper again, his face a mask. The house had become a graveyard of unspoken words. By the weekend, the fracture spread wider. Relatives called, asking about my son's promotion, about the celebratory lunch. I answered with polite words, careful not to reveal the cracks. "He is well," I said. "We are proud." Each lie tasted bitter. On Sunday, my son left the house without explanation. Hours later, my daughter-in-law sat in the garden, her face pale, her hands twisting in her lap. My husband joined her. They spoke quietly, too far for me to hear, but their silhouettes together through the glass pierced me. They looked like co-conspirators sharing a secret, though the secret had already broken us. That night I confronted my husband again. "You see what has happened," I said. "You see our son drifting away. Is this what you wanted?" His expression hardened. "What I want is to keep this family intact. What destroys families is suspicion, whispers, accusations. If you truly care for him, you will stop." "Stop?" I repeated. "Stop seeing what I see? Stop hearing what I hear? Stop being alive in this house?" He turned away, offering no reply. I returned to my room and opened the drawer. The bill lay there still, patient, unyielding. I laid it on the table and placed my hand over the names. My tears fell silently onto the paper, darkening the ink. In my notebook, I wrote, "The storm passed, but left ruins. My son no longer looks at me the same. My husband hides behind calm words. My daughter-in-law trembles between guilt and silence. And I, what am I, if not the keeper of a truth no one dares to hold?" The words blurred as I wrote them, my hand heavy with exhaustion. I closed the book and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house shift in the dark. My son's door closed, my daughter-in-law's sobs faint, my husband's chair creaking in the study. Silence had become our only common language. The days that followed blurred together. The house no longer felt like home, but like a waiting room where everyone avoided each other's eyes. My son rose early, returned late, his greetings clipped. My daughter-in-law moved softly, careful with her words, careful with her footsteps. My husband carried himself with the same calm veneer, but I saw the strain at the corners of his eyes, the way his hand trembled slightly when he poured his tea. I moved through the rooms like a ghost. I still cooked, still tidied, still performed the rituals of a mother and a wife, but my presence was like wallpaper seen but no longer noticed. Even my own reflection startled me, a woman hollowed by suspicion and silence. One evening, I attempted to speak with my son. He sat at the table, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "You used to tell me everything," I whispered. "Now you barely look at me." He exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the grain of the wood. "Mother, I don't know what to believe anymore. I hear you, I hear them, and both sound impossible. If I believe you, my family shatters. If I believe them, I lose you. What choice do I have?" His words sliced me deeper than any denial. "I never wanted to break your family," I said softly. "I only wanted to protect it." He rose then, pressing a quick kiss to my hair. "Please," he murmured, "let it rest." He left me at the table with my untouched tea, steam curling into emptiness. That night I sat awake while the others slept. The drawer called to me once more. I opened it, spread the papers across the bed, the hotel bill, the receipts, the torn stationery, the loyalty card, a collection of proof, yet proof no one wanted. I thought of burning them, of releasing myself from their weight, but fire cannot erase memory. At dawn, I walked to the riverbank alone. Mist clung to the water, softening the world. I carried the hotel bill folded in my hand. The inked names stared at me, stubborn, unyielding. For a long moment, I considered letting it slip into the current, to let the river swallow what I could not, but my hand refused. I returned home with the paper still in my grip. Later that day, as I folded laundry, I overheard laughter in the garden. My husband and daughter-in-law stood together among the flowers. Their voices were light, careful, almost ordinary. When my son returned and joined them, the sound grew fuller, brighter. I watched through the window, unseen. To anyone outside, we were a family intact. Inside, I felt myself shrinking. That evening, my husband approached me in the kitchen. His face was composed, his tone gentle. "For the sake of peace, you must stop digging. Whatever you think you see, let it go. He needs stability, not chaos." "And what of me?" I asked. He paused, then shook his head. "You are strong enough to endure." He is not. His words settled like ash. I nodded, though inside I broke again. That night, my son and his wife laughed together over dinner, trying to weave normalcy from shredded cloth. My husband spoke calmly about work. I smiled faintly, eating slowly, my hands steady though my heart trembled. The bill remained hidden, silent, between the folds of my clothes. Before bed, I wrote in my notebook one last entry. "I am not blind. I am not mad. But silence has made me both in their eyes. The truth is not denied, nor admitted. It lives between us like a ghost we all pretend not to see." I closed the notebook and placed it atop the drawer. I did not lock it. Let them find it someday. Let them decide whether I was faithful, foolish, or simply forgotten. The house slept. I lay awake, listening to the rhythm of breathing in the rooms around me. My son's steady, my daughter-in-law's light, my husband's uneven. I thought of the river, of the paper I had refused to release. Perhaps tomorrow I would destroy it. Perhaps tomorrow I would keep it still. The night stretched, silent, endless.